3 years ago, I sat down and made a list of every passive income idea I could find online. Print-on-demand shirts, a dropshipping store, an affiliate blog, a course I hadn't finished making yet about a skill I hadn't fully mastered myself. I remember feeling genuinely excited that night, like I'd finally found the loophole everyone else was missing, the version of working where the money kept showing up even when I wasn't. I want to tell you honestly what actually happened when I tried to build that life, and why I eventually stopped chasing it entirely, and started chasing something almost nobody talks about with any excitement at all. Boring income. Before we get into it, a quick introduction for anyone new here. I'm Jasmine. I hold a degree in business strategy and transformation, and for the past 7 years I've studied how everyday people build or fail to build lasting income, and somewhere in the middle of that research, I became one of the case studies myself, for a while, on the wrong side of it. Let's start with what passive income actually promised, because the promise itself is worth examining closely before we get into why it fell apart for me. The pitch, whether it came from a course, a YouTube video, or a friend who'd figured it out, was always some version of the same idea. Build something once, and it pays you forever, with less and less effort required over time, until eventually you're making money in your sleep while sipping something tropical on a beach somewhere. It's a genuinely appealing idea. I don't think anyone who buys into it is foolish for wanting it. The problem isn't the desire. The problem is what actually happens when you try to build it, and how different that reality is from the pitch. My first attempt was a print-on-demand shirt store. The appeal was obvious. No inventory, no upfront cost beyond a small monthly platform fee, designs uploaded once, and theoretically selling forever after that. I spent about 6 weeks designing shirts, researching trending niches, learning just enough about ad platforms to run a small budget, and waiting. I sold, across those 6 weeks and the 2 months after that, 11 shirts total, most of them to friends who felt bad for me. The math, once I actually sat down and did it honestly, was brutal. After platform fees, ad spend, and the time I'd invested learning software and design tools, I had made less per hour than minimum wage, spread out over a project I'd told everyone was going to change my financial life. My second attempt was an affiliate blog, reviewing products in a niche I genuinely cared about. This one felt more legitimate, because it involved actual writing and research, skills I already had some confidence in. I wrote consistently for about 4 months, roughly 60 articles, each one taking several hours to research and write properly. 4 months in, my blog was earning around $40 a month in affiliate commissions. $40 after roughly 200 hours of work. If you do that math, and I did, more than once, hoping I'd gotten it wrong, it comes out to about 20 cents an hour. Not $20, 20 cents. My third attempt, and the one that finally broke something in how I was thinking about all of this, was a digital course. I'd have to be honest and say the course itself wasn't even bad. The content was solid. I'd spent real time on it. But I had built it around a topic I found interesting, rather than one people were actively searching for solutions to, which meant that even after launch, I was spending almost all of my time trying to convince people they needed something they hadn't been looking for in the first place. Sound familiar? At the time, I didn't have language for what was going wrong. I just knew that 3 separate attempts at passive income had each required enormous upfront effort, ongoing maintenance, and constant promotion, and none of them had actually become passive in any meaningful sense of that word. I was working just as hard, sometimes harder, than I would have at a regular job, except now the income was unpredictable, and I had nobody to blame but myself when a month came in low. Here's what I eventually understood, and it took embarrassingly long to get here, given that I'd already spent years studying business patterns professionally by that point. The word passive in passive income is doing an enormous amount of false advertising. Almost nothing about these businesses is actually passive, especially in the early years, and often not even after that. What's actually passive, if anything, is the delivery mechanism, The fact that a digital file or an affiliate link doesn't require you to personally show up and hand it to someone. But the demand generation, the part where people actually find out your thing exists and decide to buy it, that part is almost never passive. That part requires constant marketing, constant content, constant adaptation to whatever algorithm currently controls your visibility. And here's the part that really got me. All three of my failed attempts had one thing in common that I hadn't noticed until I laid them side by side. None of them were solving a problem people were already actively looking to solve. I'd built things I thought people should want, rather than things people already knew they wanted, and then I'd spent all my passive energy trying to manufacture desire from scratch, which, it turns out, is one of the most expensive and exhausting things you can try to do in business. Around this time, almost by accident, I ended up talking with a man named Robert who ran a small pressure washing business in the same city I was living in. I'd met him because my own driveway needed cleaning, and out of habit, I asked him about his business, half expecting the usual grinding it out story. Instead, Robert told me something that stuck with me for a long time. He said he worked hard, sure, especially the first year. But every single week without fail, someone's driveway got dirty. Someone's deck needed cleaning before a family gathering. Someone's business needed its storefront looking presentable. And none of that ever required him to convince anyone the problem existed in the first place. He just had to be visible when they eventually searched for someone to fix it, which happened constantly, reliably, without him having to manufacture the need. I remember driving home that day, turning the comparison over in my head. Robert's business wasn't passive in the sense that he personally still did a lot of the work, at least at that point. But it was something else, something I didn't have good language for yet. It was boring, in the most literal sense. Pressure washing isn't glamorous. Nobody's writing a course about the freedom lifestyle of pressure washing, but it was also reliable in a way none of my passive attempts had ever come close to being, because the demand for it already existed before Robert ever showed up, and would keep existing long after he retired. That conversation is really where the shift started for me, even though it took a while longer to fully reorganize how I thought about income. I started calling this alternative boring income in my own head, half as a joke, and the name stuck because it was honest. Boring income isn't about avoiding effort. Some boring income businesses require plenty of hands-on work, at least early on. What defines boring income isn't the amount of effort involved. It's the source of the demand. Passive income, as it's usually marketed, tries to generate income from something you create once, hoping demand for it will follow. Boring income starts from existing demand, a problem people already have and are already looking to solve, and builds the business around meeting that demand reliably. The word passive describes an aspiration about your future effort level. The phrase boring income describes something more honest, the actual source of the money, which tends to be unglamorous, physical, or at least unremarkable sounding, precisely because those are the categories where real, constant demand lives. Let me walk through what actually changed once I stopped chasing passive income and started applying this new filter to everything. The first thing that changed was how I evaluated new ideas. Instead of asking, could this eventually run without me, I started asking, does this solve a problem people already know they have, right now, today? That single change in the question eliminated almost every idea I used to find exciting, and it's worth being honest that this was initially disappointing. A lot of the ideas that had felt inspiring, a course, a digital product, a subscription box, simply didn't pass this new filter, because they all required manufacturing desire, rather than meeting demand that already existed. The second thing that changed was how I felt about physical, hands-on work. I'd previously dismissed anything that required showing up in person as the opposite of freedom, the thing I was specifically trying to escape. But once I reframed the goal around reliable demand instead of personal absence, hands-on service work started looking a lot more appealing, not because I suddenly loved manual labor, but because the income attached to it was so much more predictable than anything I'd built online. The third thing that changed was my relationship with marketing. With my old passive attempts, marketing was everything, the entire engine of the business. And when I stopped running ads or posting content, revenue dropped to almost nothing within days. With boring, demand-driven services, marketing became something closer to visibility maintenance, making sure people could find you when they were already looking, rather than constantly convincing strangers they had a problem they hadn't noticed yet. That's a fundamentally lighter kind of marketing to sustain over years. I eventually put this new filter into practice myself, starting a small local service business rather than another digital attempt. Something that solved a problem I could verify people were already actively searching for in my own city. I won't pretend it was easy, or that it became passive overnight, because it didn't. And the whole point of this video is that expecting it to become passive quickly is exactly the trap I'd already fallen into 3 times before. But 18 months in, that one boring, unglamorous business was generating more reliable monthly income than all 3 of my previous passive attempts combined had ever produced. And it was doing so with far less existential dread about whether the algorithm would change and wipe out my traffic overnight. 3 mistakes I made that I now watch other people make constantly. Mistake 1. Mistaking requires less of my personal presence eventually, for will succeed with less effort now. Every boring income business I've since studied or built required real, sustained effort in the beginning. The payoff isn't less work overall. It's more predictable work tied to demand that already exists, instead of unpredictable work tied to demand you have to manufacture from nothing. Mistake 2. Choosing ideas based on how exciting they sounded to talk about, rather than how reliably they'd generate income. My affiliate blog sounded impressive at parties. Robert's pressure washing route did not. But only one of us was making consistent, livable income after the same amount of time invested. And it wasn't me. Mistake 3, and this is the one that took me the longest to accept, treating the passive label itself as a meaningful signal of quality. A business being labeled passive tells you nothing about whether it will actually generate income. It only tells you what someone is hoping you'll believe about the effort required, which, in my experience, is usually a significant understatement of the truth. If you're sitting where I was 3 years ago, chasing something that keeps promising to eventually require less of you, here's the question I wish someone had asked me back then. Forget whether this business will eventually become passive. Ask instead, does this solve a problem people are already, right now, today, actively searching for a solution to? If the honest answer is yes, you're looking at something with a real chance of becoming reliable income, whether or not it ever becomes fully passive in the way the course is promised. If the honest answer is no, you're about to spend months or years, like I did, manufacturing desire from nothing, which is exhausting, expensive, and, in my direct experience, rarely worth what it costs you in time and confidence along the way. I don't regret those 3 years chasing passive income, even though they didn't work out the way I'd hoped, because they taught me something I don't think I would have believed if someone had just told me directly. The word passive was never really describing the income. It was describing a fantasy about effort that almost never survives contact with an actual business. What actually works, in my experience and in almost every story I've studied since, is boring, demand-driven income that requires real effort, especially early on, in exchange for something passive income rarely delivers, reliability that doesn't depend on convincing anyone of anything they didn't already believe. If this video resonated with something you've experienced yourself, whether you're midway through a passive income attempt right now, or you're just starting to suspect the math doesn't add up, tell me about it in the comments. I'd genuinely like to know if your experience matched mine. If this video helped you see your own situation more clearly, hit like so it reaches more people, and subscribe for more videos like this every week. I'm Jasmine, and I'll see you in the next one.